Yeah. So I sent through a question earlier this week to you. Um, I used your stuff previously to go through my sergeant's board, and it worked very well. So I plan on doing that again to use for my inspector's board. However, this time we've been told that we're going to have 4 to 5 competency-based questions, and then 2 questions relating to policy, where we are going to be given a number of policies to revise, and then asked a question or given a scenario where we will be given 5 minutes to formulate a response, and then obviously a set amount of time to deliver that response. So I was wondering if you had any methods of delivering that response that would hopefully score against that.
Okay, great. And this is for a position of, is it sergeant in firearms unit?
Inspector.
Inspector in firearms. Okay, so it's inspector promotion or inspector direct promotion into firearms?
Promotion.
Just promotion broadly. Okay,
Yeah.
great. Sorry, where did I get firearms from?
It was in the policies that I sent through to you.
That was it. That's where I got it from. Yeah, because you might be thinking, why is he talking about firearms? So it's in the policies. So, okay. Craig's answer. So what Craig asked was, we've got the inspectors coming up. There's going to be 4 or 5 questions which we say competency-based, but they're all competency-based. They're all assessed against the competency and values framework, and the behaviours in it can't be assessed against anything else. But what you are going to get is some policing scenarios. And you've been given some policies. Actually, I saw what you sent us. Thank you. That's a lot of policies, isn't it? You've been given a lot of policies there. There's everything from post-firearms trauma, something or other, to welfare, to performance, to... It's just a really good plethora of policies there. Am I right there, Craig? Just unmute yourself.
Yes, you are.
Yeah. So have you dived into those policies?
Yeah, I've been reading through them, looking at them from obviously from an inspector's point of view to see what direction they could go in, try and sort of figure out what questions could be asked, what scenarios that you could get.
Yeah. Okay. So this is your board isn't coming up really soon, is it?
3 to 4 weeks.
All right, we've got plenty of time still. Okay. So in respect of going for an inspector's board, I would, even if they didn't give you those scenarios, even if they didn't give you those policies, I would expect you to know them anyway. Because you're going for a position where, as an inspector, I'd suggest you need to have a really good handle on what various policies are, because they're your checklist. But when things go pear-shaped and things are getting difficult and you're up against the wall and you're under pressure, you do need to rely on policy. And those policies will help guide you. They're like a checklist, aren't they? If they're written in the right way, they should be like a checklist of things to do. Does that make sense? Is that making sense so far?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. So as a potential inspector, you should be aware of a lot of those anyway. Although when I looked at the list, I did think, if I was preparing for inspector, I probably wouldn't even be aware that there was a policy on that thing. So unless you've got a really good policy library in your force, you won't know that some of them exist, because quite frankly, most forces have hundreds and hundreds of policies, and a lot of them are fairly meaningless, actually. Mike Barton, the Chief Constable of Durham Constabulary, years ago, before he retired about 5, 6 years ago, I think. He was quite a character. And he used to talk about, I've heard him speak at a couple of conferences, he used to talk about how he's got a policy destruction machine. And it's called me. He says, I am the policy destruction regime. And when people quote policy at me, I just say, could you get that policy for me? And I'll look at it. And if I think it's ridiculous and not helpful, I'll just tear it up and say, well, it's finished now. And I'm the Chief Constable, so I can do that. Because he said, we've got hundreds of policies and no one can know the contents of them all, and no one can even know which ones exist, because you don't know what you don't know. Does that sound fair enough so far, Craig?
Yes, it does.
I've given you some key ones to look at. But those key ones, I'd expect you to be able to know what's inside them anyway. Now, what am I expecting them to give you? In two scenarios, I think what they're probably going to give you is scenarios that may have some conflict with the policy. So there may be something in that scenario where you think, if I follow the policy, then the end result will be this, whatever it might be. So let me give you an example. You don't have to say what force you're in, that's fine. But my guess is your force has got some kind of policy around domestic violence and some kind of positive arrest culture, that there's an expectation that an arrest will be made when when there is sufficient evidence, reasonable grounds to believe that there's been violence of some form and it's domestic related. Am I right, Craig?
So I'm in a non-home office force, so we don't really deal with a lot of domestic violence and stuff like that. However, yeah, I don't think there's a domestic violence policy, to be honest.
Okay, so I'm probably giving you a completely inappropriate policy because I didn't know you're in a non-home office force. But run with me on this one.
Yeah,
Run with me
sure.
on this one because I'm not quite sure what force you're in, and I don't need you to tell me. It'd be very hard for me to come up with another scenario because it's probably quite a specialist area that you're in. So, um, so most forces have that as a policy. This is our policy.
Yeah,
However, there's a scenario where one of your officers attends and they're completely not sure what to do. And the sergeant's not sure what to do neither. They come to you as the inspector. And the scenario is such that the individual who has slapped his partner, and there is evidence of that, even though she's saying, nothing happened, please, nothing happened, go, just leave, just get out, just nothing happened. But there's some reddening around her face, and there's all the indicators that there's been some kind of dispute, violent altercation. And he's there just in tears, because and the officers are there thinking, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? And the sergeant's there, what do we do? What do we do? And the thing that's compounding it is that we find out that he's he's only just retired from the armed services. And just recently he saw he was across the line and he saw some action in some part of the world. And the reason why he left because he really couldn't cope with the fact that his best friend got blown up next to him, and there's bits of his friend's body went all over him, and he's never been the same since. And got medically resigned, medically retired from the armed services, and he's only been back at home after a year-long deployment where all of this happened for just a few weeks, and he just can't cope. He really can't cope. He's at breaking point. He doesn't know what to do, and he just broke and he just snapped, and he went and apparently hit his wife, and his wife partner's saying nothing happened, but he's saying, no, I did it, I slapped her, arrest me, you've got to arrest me. And she's saying, no, don't, that's the worst thing for him. The absolute worst thing for him. If you arrest him now, you're going to set him back months. And so we've got a scenario now. You see at the picture, Craig,
yeah,
you've got this scenario where actually there's a lot of moving parts, there's a lot going on. And force policy says one thing, but I don't know. I mean, we could add layer and layer and layer of things that complicate and conflict it, and could create even more of a conundrum. But we've got a conundrum now, don't we? I mean, what would you say the right thing to do is? Is it the right thing to arrest him, or is it the right thing to do something else? You've got all sorts of different courses of action available to you. And okay, maybe this isn't pitched at the right level. It's probably not pitched at inspector level. It might be pitched at sergeant level. But what to do? I mean, you don't have to give me a definite, this is what you do, but to what extent is this a bit confusing and a bit sort of conflicting for the officers who are there?
yeah. I can see where you're coming from because obviously you've got the mental health aspect. All the avenues of help that you could go down. Obviously, you say the force policy, making arrests. Obviously, domestic violence against women and girls is quite high on the
Mm,
national agenda at the moment as well.
yeah.
So, I think there'd be probably a bit of pressure from uh, stuff that is put out from your local force that would probably feed into that as well.
Mm.
So,
So we've got a conundrum, and this is what I think they're going to
Yeah.
present you with, is some form of conundrum where forced policy says one thing, but doing the right thing says another. So there's all sorts of alternative actions you could take, and please feel free to disagree with me here. Bear in mind, I've been out of the job for 10 years, so what the hell do I know? But others who are watching this may be thinking, no, we'd never do that. What we'd do is this. Yeah, I get that. All I'm doing is I'm painting a picture of a sort of conundrum that you might get, where there are alternative pathways which will still end up with the same thing, which is him being dealt with appropriately for the assault and facing whatever out of court or court disposal route we want to take. He's going to get there eventually. What route he takes, we don't know at this moment in time. And I would hope he'd also get the support he'd need to get himself back together, because we're not in the business of splitting families up. You know, this sounds like a family unit that might want to stay together. And we're not in the business of splitting them up. We're in the business of keeping them together, but in a way that where they don't hurt each other and harm each other. So it sounds like they all might need mental health support. They all might need something, cognitive-based therapy for him, I don't know. But all of that needs exploring. But it might be in conflict with what the force is saying. Now, think NDM. What does the Code of Ethics say in respect to the NDM and making decisions outside of policy? Shall I
I can't
provide you?
remember. I can't remember off the top of my head.
All right, I'm just there. I'm firing this question at you. So, what the NDM, as long as it's not been changed, but please feel free to correct me at any time, because there are people who are wiser than me around, especially in respect of law. But last time I looked, it said that you can breach policy or guidance if you have a rationale for doing so. So one of the roles of an inspector or a sergeant, I think, is making good, sound decisions, even when you may not be in full possession of all the facts. Really hard to make decisions, and so that's what policy is there for. Policy is there to help us. But there's also that line from, I don't know if you've seen it, the film about the World War II fighter race. Did become Sir, I think it was Sir Douglas Bader, called Reach for the Skies. Have you seen it? Black and white film.
No.
Anyone seen it? Well worth watching. Lovely film, brilliant film. It's a bit 1950s or 40s, but if you can cope with that, it's fine. But there's a line in there where Douglas Bader is speaking to his. He's done something wrong at the very beginning of the thing. He's a fighter race, and he's done some rollover or some fancy thing that he shouldn't have done, and he's getting a strip torn off him for it. But then after, his commander says something like, "Remember, policies and guidance are there for the policies are there for the guidance of wise men and the adherence of fools." The guidance of wise men and the adherence of fools. Now, okay, men and women, and women and men, or all officers, should have been rephrased it. But remember, this was a film from the 1940s, 1950s, when the world was a different place. So forgive the gender-specific language, but policies there for the guidance of wise men and the adherence of fools. So what they were saying in that line was that actually exactly that policy is there for your guidance. It's not there for your adherence, because if you adhere to it, you might make the wrong decision. So that's what I think they're going to do for you there, Craig. I think they're going to give you some scenarios where the conundrum is doing the right thing. Doing the right thing. Where doing the right thing might mean that you need to breach the policy, but you're okay doing that. There is justification in law for it. Because remember, the Code of Ethics, the NDM, sits within the Code of Ethics. The Code of Ethics is a code of practice under statute. So it is the law of this land. The law of this land tells you that you can breach guidance and policy if you have a clear rationale for doing so. But that's the tough part, is explaining your rationale. Because on Monday morning, you can guarantee there'll be some armchair SLT there who are saying, but didn't you do this, or didn't you consider, or whatever it might be. So the other phrase to bear in mind is based on the information and intelligence I currently have access to, or I had access to at the time the following situation was panning out. So you can only make that decision based on the information and intelligence you have. So there's going to be a lot of moving parts in the scenario, which is why they're giving you time to prepare for it. 5 minutes to deliver your answer. It needs to be quite detailed, but don't be afraid. That's the advice I'd kind of finish with. Do not be afraid of going outside of false policy, because do you think they're looking with an inspector at inspector rank? Do you think they're looking for inspectors who can make wise decisions, or inspectors who are just going to follow policy rigidly?
Oh yeah, people that can make decisions.
Yeah, because following policy is not making decisions, it's just following policy.
Yeah.
So there's another thing I would do to help prepare yourself for this is, the goal is not becoming an inspector. The goal is acting like a wise inspector. So I'd use that phrase wise. So when you're faced with any given conundrum, or if you look at other conundrums that take place, or look at the logs and look for some serious conundrums there where they're looking for advice and guidance from the inspector, or you hear the phrase, Inspector, could you just take a look at log 518, please? We just need some guidance on that. Take a look at it yourself and be aware of what the policies are, but then think, right, if I was in that scenario, how would I behave? What behaviors would a wise inspector demonstrate? Because you might have a checklist of 20 things that you need to do, but sometimes those 20 things that you need to do, well, one, you've not got time to look at that checklist, and two, you need to make a wise decision. And a wise decision might be outside of those 20 different things that you need to do. So behave as if you were a wise inspector. And that's not it's not an idea that Brendan came up with. It's an idea Christians came up with, actually. And, I'm not very Christian myself. Some of you might be. But you might be used to a phrase, what would Jesus do in these circumstances? Because people who follow the Christian faith want to be more Jesus-like. So they're faced with a conundrum in life. What would Jesus do? Because they aspire to be like Jesus in terms of decision-making and things to do. So this is no different as a concept. What would a wise inspector do in this scenario? And this is where you might want to look up to role models. Because I know I've done this through my career, and what I had was certain role models where I wouldn't role model them as a whole, but there's parts of them that I really liked. So when I was faced with a certain conundrum, I can still remember thinking, when I was a young constable, do my sergeant's exam and preparing for it and thinking one day I'm going to get promoted. What would, bless his soul, Sergeant Blackhurst do? Because he was the wisest sergeant I knew. What would Sergeant Blackhurst do in this set of circumstances? And then I started, when I went for promotion to inspector, I don't know if he's still around, I hope he is. I used to think, what would Inspector Malpas do? Because he was one of my first inspectors that I admired and respected. The others, I can't remember their names because I didn't admire and respect them, but Andy Malpas, hope his ears are ringing. What would Inspector Malpas do? Because he was one of the wisest inspectors I knew. In this given set of circumstances, what would he do? How would he behave? And I'm going to just behave like him. I'm going to be that person. Make sense, Craig?
Yes, that does. Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Useful or?
No, that was useful. Thanks.
Awesome. Great. Thank you.